Hey guys, my name's Nova, this is Film Express, and I'm so excited to be trying something a little bit new for the channel today. I'm going to be sitting with Tiger G, the writer and director of the acclaimed 2020 short film Wuhan Driver, and the writer and director of the new Bobby Lee short film Death and Ramen that's been hitting the festival circuit really hard this past year. So Tiger's been gracious enough to give us a little bit of time out of his busy schedule to talk about his new project, to talk about his inspirations. I'm going to be asking him a lot of questions, doing a little bit of a Q&A and an interview, and I'm just so excited. So guys, let's get right into it. This is my interview with Tiger G, the writer and director of Death and Ramen.
So you and I met on Letterboxd, and we both had a mutual distaste for Jordan Peele's movie Nope, and you just went off on Letterboxd, and that review got like a shit ton of traction, and it was one of the most popular reviews on Letterboxd or something on that movie, or the most popular negative review. It just felt like you did not care. And it was almost so beautiful how gloves off you were about it, and but I think I followed you, and that's how I first found out about you.
I mean, I appreciate it. I feel like my negative reviews always get a lot of traction, which is hilarious. But
I mean, hating is an art, and you from that review obviously can do it quite well.
You know, and I love Jordan Peele. It's not like I ever try to tear down somebody's career, but I feel like, you know, you can always appreciate somebody's career and legacy and still find problems with a piece of work that they've done, you know?
I think the best part about that is also you can tell you care a lot about movies. You're not hiding behind any sort of irony, and I think that's the best way to hate. It's coming from a place of love in a way, you know? It's
especially once you have high standards, if you've seen, you know, thousands and thousands of movies, you want movies to deliver something at a certain level. And when you know a director or writer is capable of that, they don't meet that, then it's, like you said, it's gloves off at that point. Just let them know, because people are capable of really good things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And that's another thing that impressed me about you. I mean, I'm not going to mince words. You're a young director, but you approach your stuff with a lot of maturity. And like I said, you do things with a sociological angle, which I find is interesting. Not a lot of people do that. So kudos to you for tackling stuff like that, which immediately gets in my good books as a critic.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that. Sociological is interesting. That's the first time I actually heard that. I mean, for Wuhan Driver, definitely more so. But yeah, I do kind of looking at things from a more bird's eye view, and then the grand and pulled back meeting the intensely interior on these two very different lenses put together is something that is really interesting to me, for sure.
I think that's a beauty of a good story too, is when you have that high level idea, then you can bring it down to the personal, the ground level, and then that's when audiences will really connect to it. That's what struck me with Wuhan Driver, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can always connect with somebody on the basis of hating a film or the basis of loving a film, which is so interesting, right?
Whatever you do it from love and passion for the art, and you'll be good, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially, yeah, because art is going to elicit strong reactions no matter what, whether good or bad, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, now with Death and Ramen, there's obviously so much going on with this one, but I think the main thing, and I think the main attraction for most people, is going to be Bobby Lee starring in this film. And it seems like you put so much work into getting Bobby for this role. So my main question is, what was your reasoning for chasing Bobby down for this? Was there something about his personal history or his past work that made you think he'd be the perfect foundation for this story?
I wanted to make a comedy. But I didn't want the type of humor to be the sort of Saturday Night Live, aware of itself being funny sort of humor, hiding behind irony. I wanted a type of funny that was less tread upon in American humor, I would say. One that draws on a very real place. What I find funniest is the tragicomedy genre, and sort of the two like sides of the spectrum of the sadder something gets, the funnier it gets, and vice versa. Like this feedback loop that you sort of can enter into tonally. In terms of Bobby, I think that he's just like the perfect. I thought that he was the perfect symbol of that. You know, I decided I want to work with him and write a film I wanted to write a film with him in mind when I saw the 300th episode of Tiger Belly, where, if you haven't seen it, like, he kind of just, in front of Stephen Yeun and David Cho, sort of like was so vulnerable and talked about his history with addiction, depression, his trauma with his family, and he's very, very outspoken about that. That sort of, to me, was like a much more tender side of the manic, like, exhibitionist Bobby that we all know from Mad TV. And ever since then, I sort of like started seeing him differently, and understanding like where his humor comes from. It actually comes from a deeply personal place, whether he admits it or not, which he doesn't. But yeah, so like his face is so much depth, and I just thought that he was such a like a beautiful, like, human being, and that I wrote the film with him in mind because he's just such a sort of like tragic face, like, put in as kindly and poetic a way as possible. Like, that's sort of how he is, and he doesn't really need to try to be all that dramatic or funny. He can just kind of like exist. Yeah, I just wanted to write the perfect role for him.
That's beautiful. I think fans of Bobby are going to be grateful that you got such a vulnerable and beautiful performance out of Bobby. I think he did a fantastic job. Now, when it comes to directing an actor like Bobby, do you communicate a lot with him and construct the performance together, or do you give him a lot of freedom and, like, because he's obviously going to improvise sometimes, do you let him do that? Is it more like you got the puppet strings, or do you really let him do the thing?
A little bit of both. I think that I have a very precise approach to making films on a technical level. You know, approaching things like with cinematography especially, I'm like a very serial storyboarder, and I make these like pretty precise animatics when I shoot. I saw like working with Bobby kind of like creating a framework in which he has a sort of like room to play, but stepping outside of that would sort of like mean that we lost the thread, the emotional thread or the narrative thread. There was definitely like a push and pull between me and him, and Bobby he doesn't really have an approach to acting like a lot of actors do, because he's primarily a stand-up comedian where the bigger the reaction, the better it is. And he's really great at playing like heightened emotions, and also good at playing like zero. He's like sort of good at 0 and 100. But a lot of the movie existed in 50, and sort of like creating that framework where the nuance of having a kind of real and believable moment to me was what I was always looking for from him. And Matt, on the other hand, just kind of really grounded his performance with a more like considered and professional approach to acting.
Definitely. And I think that when you say the film operates at 50, I think that's such a beautiful way to put it, because, you know, it makes those highlight moments really stand out, those heavier moments. So that's really great. Now with Wuhan Driver, you tackled a timely topic, you know, at the height of the pandemic, and you're kind of trying to bring awareness to an issue that many Asian Americans were facing at the time. Now, compared to Death and Ramen, what's the driving factor of you tackling a story like this now? Is there like a personal angle to this, or is there something that you're trying to bring awareness to?
Not necessarily awareness on a political level where I'm wagging like a finger at the audience and telling them how to feel. But for me, I've always been interested in like a sort of tragicomedy genre with a more stylized and genre-driven approach. Wuhan Driver, to me, never felt like a very like a really accurate, representation of my style. But I just felt like that film had to come out during that time because it was serving like something that I needed to say during that time about my identity. But in terms of like Death and Ramen, the starting point was actually really early when my grandpa passed away when I was 17, and the idea of making a comedy with the Grim Reaper actually emerged like during that time. I didn't really have the language to write something like Death and Ramen until like after I made Wuhan Driver, but like that seed had been planted for a while. The idea of like making The Seventh Seal into like a buddy comedy, wherein instead of like man sitting down and playing chess with death and this oppositional nature, we sort of like see man sitting down eating a bowl of noodles with death as an almost peace offering. That to me was a deeply funny thing, but it was also like there's something sweet, gentle, and sincere about it. And I don't really see that like philosophical angle on death that has as much like acceptance paired with a very like genre driven approach. So I was really curious to kind of take that and run with it.
So that kind of leads into my next question too. Obviously you mentioned The Seventh Seal, which is like the inspiration that's the most palpable, like it jumps out at a viewer right away. Obviously the trope in cinema, like meeting death or facing death, it's not incredibly new. So how did you aim to like subvert this, and what other more maybe subconscious or maybe conscious but less obvious inspirations led you with the creative decisions in this film?
Yeah, The Seventh Seal, like even before The Seventh Seal, we have this like long, even before cinema, this long tradition of man meets death. We have the Dance Macabre, and then we have all these like paintings by this Flemish painter, Frans Franken de Younger, which like all of those things of like the Grim Reaper trope always like really tickled me, because I just always felt like it was so like, it was such a simple metaphor, and yet it could function on so many different levels. But yes, this long tradition of the Grim Reaper was so well worn, and that was actually the main challenge and the main tight wire act, was to not make it feel like the angle was the same. And that's tough because there's so many short films that are made every single year with the Grim Reaper in it, and to sort of make something that could stand out and actually play at festivals where the programmers at festivals wouldn't sort of roll their eyes and see, oh, this another one of those, was tough. And I think that the one thing I felt like I could do was to just be as sincere as possible, to not be ironic, and to be gentle, and to sort of like show my belly to the audience in a way, but also like, subvert this like other side of it where it's not this really existentially drab and somber, Scandinavian take on death. Just trying to avoid any cliche possible in the face of functioning within the biggest cliche was sort of what we were trying to do. The second part of your question was about like other inspirations. I think I can go on a long time about like, different things we pulled from. Thematically, there's Tampopo, of course, ramen cinema. Stylistically, there's Old Boy. Visually, there's Old Boy. Visually, there's also Le Havre. I don't know if you know that movie.
Yes, that's absolutely.
Like, we just wanted to sort of have a more Euro aesthetic, but approach it with like a very American, but also even like kind of Asian sort of humor.
I'm almost disappointed in myself I didn't catch the Tampopo inspiration there. That's great. Now, I think you mentioned, you wanted to kind of avoid any cliches, and I think a way that you managed to do that here, you make it very like cultural and personal. But cultural identity seems to be like prominent theme in your two projects so far. So what does your cultural identity mean to you? And do you think you're always going to be doing stories that speak to your heritage in a sense?
Yeah, I think my heritage is interesting because I kind of existed in both the East and the West in my life, and I'm kind of like in between these two states. I moved to the U.S. when I was 12, and I grew up in Hong Kong and moved to the U.S. when I was 12 and moved to New York. I sort of felt like neither existing in either culture was kind of like how I'd always felt. And then at some point down the line, I remember I was like 16 years old or so, and I was like skipping. I was ditching school. I was in boarding school and I was ditching school, and my mom was like really upset at me, and she, as punishment, put me, gave me a job as a dishwasher in a Chinese restaurant, and but it was a Chinese restaurant in like, you know, in New York, and seeing the kitchen staff work, and seeing like this idea of like lostness and displacement, where like these like Chinese people who are like, you know, speak fluent Chinese and speak English with an accent, working in a place like New York, was so fascinating to me. And I just thought like the idea of fusion cinema then sort of like emerged to me, and I didn't really have a word for it then, but like I sort of like see filmmaking in this way where the blending of two different sensibilities, be it aesthetic or you know, philosophical, between the East and West is really interesting to me. And I think like if anything, I'll spend like, I sort of see myself spending the rest of my career figuring that out. It's almost like that Ratatouille, that scene in Ratatouille where Remy like eats the cheese and there's like this like you know, a little firework, and then he eats the strawberry and there's another firework, and then he eats it together. It's like bigger fireworks. So I sort of see making movies like that.
I think like these days audiences are eating that up too, because they want things that relate to them. Everybody's looking for that story that relates to them on a personal level, and if you can, you know, blend those two aesthetics, like you say, you're achieving a wider audience right away, right off the bat, like that. So now let me be real with you for a moment. Like Death and Ramen, it can be pretty dark at times, you know, even if there is a comedy, it is a comedy, and you approach the theme with a lot of like humor and a maturity. Do you find yourself thinking about mortality and death a lot these days? Is that something that you're thinking about?
I think I made the film to not think about it anymore. You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's one of those things where very like it's a thing that plagues you, like, you know, thoughts about the fact that someone can be there one day and they could leave, which, as I said, like, you know, came about from my grandpa passing, and the effect that it has on other people and the hole that it leaves, and then through growing a little older and the spiritual journey I went on, I sort of learned that, how do I put it? Leaving is inevitable, but if we never did, our stay could never be meaningful. And there's a hope to that, knowing that once we do leave, however flawed our lives are, once we do leave, things will carry on, and life continues outside of you with someone else and something new, and there's no reason to let that stop you from enjoying like the miracle that is life, you know. And so there's two ends of this like thought, right? There's like the reality that death is so prevalent and the tragedy that brings, and not steering away from that darkness when you're trying to tell a story about that, but at the same time also holding the other side, which is a hopeful side, is a tender side, is and an emotional one. Holding these two realities is sort of like what it means to be a person, and trying to make a movie that takes into account both ends of this existential spectrum is perhaps a lifelong project, but it's something that I'm really curious about.
I think it's very interesting. It's a beautifully warm take on mortality and death. So, I mean, like I said, it takes a lot of maturity to think about such a thing in this way. I mean, at your age too. So kudos to you. And I think with Death and Ramen, you definitely achieved kind of giving that comforting feeling with such a dark idea. Definitely. Now, speak to me about this kimchi ramen. Where did that come from?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so it was initially written to be spicy tonkotsu.
Classic.
But Bobby couldn't pronounce tonkotsu. Like, he couldn't do it right. Like, he's like, no matter how many times I said it to him, it always sounded off. To an extent where it's like no ramen chef would ever mispronounce like tonkotsu like this. And then I thought more about it. I was like, okay, he's Korean. Like, what if some like, Japanese people would get upset at me about like, him being Korean? And then so I thought kimchi ramen is also something that the ramen shop we shot at served. And then I sort of like reworked the recipe, which like I created myself. It sort of like came from like a need to kind of like a very practical need. But eventually it felt like the right thing to do, because of Bobby, I would say. Yeah.
So it's not a traditional ramen. It's not like something I can get anywhere. No, not
at all. I mean, like, but then that's the history of ramen too. I actually just came back from a trip in Tokyo where I sort of like just ate all the best ramen in Tokyo, and I learned a lot about the history of ramen, where like the Chinese brought Chinese ramen to Tokyo about like 110 years ago, and so it started from this like long tradition of Chinese cuisine. And then ramen sort of exploded in Japan, and then ramen sort of became ramyun in Korea. And so like the nature of ramen is very multiple, where like this puristic approach to what ramen actually is like kind of like defeats the whole purpose of what ramen should be. And I really like that because that's my MO of like fusion. And so yeah, like any like Japanese chefs watching the movie who are like, that's not traditional ramen, like I as a Chinese person can say just the same. So
right, that's interesting. I mean, hey, one day if we ever run into each other, I'm hoping that you can make me a bowl of this since you whipped up the recipe.
Dude, yeah. I have so many like different recipes of it. I mean, I'm so excited to sort of like make the feature too, because it's kind of like I want to dive so much deeper into like the culinary aspect of ramen, but obviously have like a peeled back philosophical approach. It's something that's really interesting to me.
So that actually leads, sorry to cut you off, that just leads it perfectly into my next question. So I heard that obviously you're trying to adapt Death and Ramen, or you're successfully adapting Death and Ramen to a feature film. So let us know a little bit about the plans on expanding this story.
Yeah, I think I just really want to dive deeper into the culinary aspect of it. And as I said, take a more philosophical approach, because what's very fascinating to me about the kitchen is actually like a more peeled back existential one. And I don't really see that often in film. It's you have like very high octane like kitchen dramas like The Bear, and then you have also like stuff like The Seventh Seal, but you never put the two together, which to me like would be the perfect comedy, because like these two like very contrary sensibilities.
And it's your fusion idea too, your fusion.
Exactly.
And it's two such widely different things that to put them together you need to be very specific about it. So if you do end up doing that, you're paving a new lane. Yeah,
I hope, maybe. But in terms of like how we're going on with it, the strike is currently happening, so there's no real progress on it in terms of like financing, but We're hoping to kind of shoot in 2025, and I've been like sort of very declaratively like kind of just stating it publicly, in hopes of it just falling into place.
Manifesting.
Exactly. I'm currently writing it and polishing the script. And honestly, it's like a great opportunity, like during the strike, to it almost feels like in the film industry anyway, like a second COVID, where nothing's really happening and you're kind of forced to sort of just be creative with as little resources as possible. And writing is free, and writing is fun. So yeah, that's sort of where we're at with the feature.
It gives you time to kind of craft and polish it the way you want. So that's great. So the two projects that you've done so far, so vastly different in style and genre and tone. So do you think you're going to be tackling any different genres? Like, what's the dream project for Tiger G, and like what's the dream genre for Tiger G?
I don't know. I actually never look at making movies from that angle in terms of like the outside in approach. I sort of see a question that interests me, and then I sort of see the vehicle that surrounds it, if that makes any sense.
Definitely.
Like genre is the vehicle on top of the question, and the tragicomedy was the perfect vehicle for Death and Ramen. But I'm interested in questions and not styles, and maybe that's why these two films are so different, because like kind of like having different approaches with different ideas. But I'm falling really comfortably in the dark humor aspect of movie making right now. But we'll see what the future holds.
I mean, as somebody who's seen both your projects, I'm definitely excited to see what you're going to do next. Yeah, it's been awesome. Like, I hope the feature takes off in 2025 for sure. And I hope you guys like win a bunch of awards. I know I think you guys were nominated for a few things so far for Death and Ramen, right?
Yeah, I mean, we screened at a bunch of festivals, and there's like a bunch sort of coming up.
Yeah, it's looking great for you guys. So I wish you guys all the best of success, all of you. And thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today. Honestly, Tiger, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So guys, there you have it. That's my interview and Q&A with Tiger G. As you can all see, he's a very, very talented, very well-spoken, mature director who knows exactly what he wants for his career, and it's just incredible to see. And he's very down to earth, very relatable and approachable. So it was just a pleasure to talk to him, get to learn a little bit more about his creative process, about his inspirations, and about what he wants out of filmmaking, which I think is just incredible. So I guess that leads me to this, guys. Now, for the channel, I love highlighting talented people, and I love talking about films that are trying something different and filmmakers that are trying something different. So with that being said, if you're a writer, director, and you have a little project, a short film, a feature film, and you want some sort of level of exposure on it, don't hesitate to contact me on Instagram, on Letterboxd, or send me an email, and we can talk about it, and maybe I could do a review or an interview or a Q&A for your short film or for your feature film, and hopefully even just get a few more eyes on it, and that could go a long way, right? As a screenwriter myself and a filmmaker myself, I know it's really hard, trying to build an audience for yourself and try to get people to see your films. I've had quite a few short films that I wish more people saw. So if I can do anything to help more talented creators get their stuff seen and kind of have a platform to speak about their inspirations and their creative purpose, then I'd be so happy to do that. So guys, that was my little Q&A with Tiger G, but it's just something I really wanted to try for the channel as well. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. I hope I can do more of this stuff for you guys, because I felt like I had a really good time interviewing Tiger and getting to know him a little bit more and talk about the project. So I urge you guys to check out Death and Ramen as soon as you can. Like, keep your eyes out for that film being released, because it's definitely doing very well at the film festivals. And keep an eye out on Tiger G and his career, because I think that we're going to be seeing a lot of great things from this filmmaker. So guys, my name is Nova. This is Film Express. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.